The story begins with a young man named Takuto who spends most of his time absorbed in a strategy game called Eternal Nations. Confined to a hospital bed, Takuto found solace and meaning only in playing Eternal Nations and eventually died with the game still running. But his death wasn't final. Moments later, Takuto opens his eyes, finding himself sitting on a throne amid ancient ruins in a forest. His first thought is about how incredibly fresh and real the air feels. Suddenly, a woman approaches him gently, asking if he is finally awake. When she reveals her face, Takuto instantly recognizes her as Atu, an elven character from Eternal Nations. Atu respectfully calls him Your Majesty, leaving Takuto utterly confused, wondering what's happening. But Takuto quickly figures out he must have somehow been transported into the world of Eternal Nations, the very game world he spent countless hours in. But this realization brings more questions. Typically, Atu would only address her king this way if he were the Lord of Mynoghra, the nation Takuto previously led in the game. Atu speaks again, this time calling him Takuto-sama and explaining further. Atu mentions that Takuto is the first ever player to conquer Nightmare difficulty using Mynoghra, widely known as the toughest civilization in the game. Atu proudly reveals that Takuto is listed on the game's global leaderboards, giving him legendary status. Takuto's confusion deepens even further. How can a mere game character know about things beyond her own game world? And Atu gently explains that she remembers everything, every victory, every defeat, each word Takuto ever spoke to her through his screen, and the entire journey have been shared together until now. Hearing this, Takuto is overcome with emotion and tears form in his eyes. Takuto tells Atu how happy he is to finally speak to her directly, confessing that she was always his favorite character in Eternal Nations. Atu warmly replies that she feels precisely the same way. Still, none of this clarifies how he ended up here, so Takuto looks at Atu directly and asks if it was she who brought him into this world. Atu honestly admits she has no clue how they got here, as she herself only arrived a few minutes ago. Still, Atu is certain of one thing, that the place feels exactly like the world of Eternal Nations. Regardless of their location, Atu is deeply grateful she has finally met her true king in person. Holding Takuto's hands gently, Atu urges him to begin their journey anew together. Atu shares her dream of rebuilding an empire with just the two of them, and since Takuto has nothing else left, so he gladly agrees to join. When Takuto extends his hand to formally shake on their partnership, Atu suddenly introduced herself dramatically as Atu, an illegitimate child born of a fallen world. Atu solemnly pledges her entire being, mind, soul, and body entirely to Takuto. Though Atu's character is technically evil, the act feels painfully cliché, leaving both her and Takuto momentarily embarrassed. Still, Takuto decides to lean into it, dramatically declaring that alongside Atu, his trusted right hand, he will establish Mynoghra, the most sinister empire of them all. Then Takuto turns to Atu, asking if she remembers what Mynoghra must always do first. Proudly, Atu states they should hide themselves away completely, staying unseen like true recluses to avoid discovery. Taking action immediately, Takuto summons a scout, a strange insect-like creature with extremely long legs. Given Mynoghra's alignment with evil and destruction, all their units naturally look horrifying, including this scout. Regardless, Takuto issues commands instructing it to investigate their surroundings thoroughly, and Atu sternly reminds it that disappointing their king isn't an option. Obediently, the scout departs on its assigned task. Then Takuto reveals to Atu that he can actually see through the scout's eyes, confirming to both of them that the world indeed works just like the game. Takuto briefly explains to Atu how summoning works here. His current total magic power is at 200 MP, and creating the scout consumed 100 MP. Takuto carefully considers his options for spending his remaining magic points. Building a base would cost only 20 MP, but Takuto also wonders if he should prioritize defense by summoning a warrior. Unfortunately, doing so would consume more power than Takuto currently possesses. In Eternal Nations, Atu is classified as a hero character, making her particularly powerful in combat. But since their new journey has barely begun, Atu's current strength level remains only at level 3, which is quite low. Thanks to the scout's reconnaissance, Takuto gains a clear picture of their surroundings, which primarily consists of endless forests. So this setting proves an ideal location for establishing Mynoghra's base, but Atu finds it unsettling that there is absolutely no wildlife or available food nearby. Realizing it would be too dangerous to relocate, Takuto instructs the scout to extend its search and explore an even wider perimeter. Then Atu begins feeling downhearted, believing she's not contributing enough to assist her king. Seeing her discouraged expression, Takuto gently reassures her, saying that simply having her by his side is more than enough. Deeply touched by his sincere words, Atu instantly becomes even more devoted to him. Meanwhile, their scout soon discovers a campsite inhabited by a group of dark elves. Takuto hesitates and is unsure what their next move should be, as accidentally encroaching on another group's territory could cause serious problems, so he figures they should lay low for now. Atu suggests optimistically that if things do take a turn for the worse, they can simply escape together. Her encouragement boosts Takuto's confidence, so they decide to quietly observe the dark elves from a safe distance and find out what they're doing here. But suddenly 3 dark elves stumble directly into them, catching both Takuto and Atu off guard. Takuto freezes in surprise, realizing that the dark elves he had carefully planned to avoid are now standing right in front of him, those same elves he was prepared to flee from if they ever crossed his path. Both Takuto and Atu remain unsure about how the encounter will turn out, but recognizing the importance of staying calm in situations like this, they manage to maintain their composure. At the same time, the dark elves have no intention of harming anyone. They explain that they have recently been driven from the city they once called home and have desperately led their people into the forest to seek safety. After a difficult journey, they have managed to set up a temporary shelter in this cursed land. However, with no food available, they are in a desperate situation, knowing their children will starve without supplies. Captain Gia, leader of the Dark Elves, is currently exploring this bleak forest alongside his soldiers, increasingly worried their journey might have been completely futile since the area seems utterly lifeless. Several of Gia's men start complaining bitterly, arguing it might have been better if they had just stayed and died back in the city, rather than starving out here. They recall grim stories about the forest being cursed by a mysterious man, a place where neither life nor love can ever flourish. Gia quickly warns them against losing hope, reminding his people that if they falter now, their children waiting anxiously back at camp won't have any chance at all. Gia firmly reminds them that their kids still have faith in them, and that turning back empty-handed simply isn't an option. Still, as Gia continues forward, he can't help but reflect on his soldiers' grim words. Deep down, Gia knows they are not wrong and the chances of survival here seem impossibly slim. However, as their leader, Gia can't afford to show fear or give up because his people depend on him to guide them safely through this crisis. Walking deeper into the woods, Gia suddenly senses the presence of Takuto and Atu. A wave of dread rushes through him, afraid that these unknown entities might attack without mercy and wipe out his entire team. Whatever choice Gia makes next could determine the fate of his people, so he holds himself and decides to approach diplomatically. When Gia finally reaches them, he is taken aback by Takuto's shadowy spirit-like appearance, though the Atu seems relatively normal. Without hesitation, Gia immediately drops to his knees, prompting his followers to do the same. Then, with a voice full of humility, Gia apologizes for entering their territory uninvited. Atu, glaringly coldly at Gia, sharply questions him, demanding to know why he would trespass despite knowing it was forbidden. Gia nervously explains their desperate circumstances, how their people were banished without warning, forced to flee their city without supplies, the exhausting journey, and the starving children were still waiting anxiously in the forest. Feeling increasingly anxious under Atu's harsh gaze, Gia braces himself, convinced they are about to execute him. However, Takuto surprises him by calmly asking if he's hungry. Gia hesitates nervously, uncertain how to respond, until Atu firmly instructs him to answer her master's question. Quietly, Gia admits he is hungry, and immediately Takuto conjures several apples out of thin air. Gia stares in bewilderment, never having seen an apple before, unsure if they are even edible. Takuto kindly assures him that the fruit is juicy and delicious, encouraging him to try it. Still hesitant, Gia looks behind him, shocked to see his men already devouring the apples eagerly. Then Atu firmly urges him to eat as well, yet Gia still feels uneasy. Noticing his hesitation, Takuto promptly conjures pears as well. Now Gia is openly suspicious and deeply confused by Takuto's generosity. The Dark Elves had always been viewed with hostility and constantly rejected by others. Then suddenly encountering someone willing to help without any hidden motive felt disturbingly unnatural. Gia finally states that he would rather bring the food back to feed the starving children in their camp, but before Gia can even finish his sentence, Takuto conjures even more fruit for him. Overwhelmed, Gia can only feel gratitude and disbelief. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the Dark Elf children lie weak and exhausted, silently praying for rescue. Suddenly, they catch a familiar scent in the air. Their prayers are answered because Gia and his soldiers have returned, bringing with them more food than they've ever seen. Gia joyfully tells everyone to prepare for a feast, and soon they're all eagerly eating, and the starving children quickly regain their strength. One of the elves then curiously asks Gia where he got all the food, but he avoids giving details. Instead, Gia simply tells them that fate finally smiled upon them. Yet deep in his heart, Gia remains haunted by the memory of the mysterious, intimidating figure he encountered in the forest. After the meal, everyone falls into a peaceful sleep except for Gia, who remains awake staring thoughtfully into the fire. As Gia stands watch, Elder Molter approaches quietly, gently pulling Gia out of his deep contemplation. Molter expresses gratitude for Gia's efforts but mentions that the fruit tastes unlike anything he has ever known even after living 200 years. Gia nods, agreeing that the fruit definitely tasted strange. Molter presses him about where the food came from, prompting Gia to confess they encountered a legendary figure after wandering deep into the cursed forest. Hearing this, Molter wonders if it was perhaps the King of Ruin, recalling ancient stories about a mythical being sent to appear when the world becomes too crowded, destroying everything and returning civilization to darkness. However, no one knows if those legends hold any truth, since no one has ever witnessed them personally. Molter asks Gia directly if the mysterious figure introduced himself as the King of Ruin. Gia admits to Takuto that he never actually introduced himself. Takuto only spoke through his servant. Molter insists there is no way a dark entity like that would offer assistance for free, demanding to know what Gia promised in exchange. However, Gia insists it was purely an act of generosity from Takuto, nothing else. Molter remains skeptical, arguing that no evil being ever offers help without hidden motives. Gia firmly calls Takuto the Great One, determined to defend him and emphasizing that he simply chose to help. Molter counters that such a noble title doesn't suit the rumored King of Ruin, but Gia refuses to budge. Gia argues passionately that Takuto deserves respect because he helped them in their time of need, and frustratingly wonders if it might have been better if they all died rather than receive such aid. Hearing this, Molter reluctantly concedes Gia's point, agreeing to handle negotiations personally when the time comes to repay their mysterious benefactor. Gia gazes over at his sleeping people, silently questioning when they might finally rest without fear. At the same time, Atu is thoroughly upset with Takuto for wasting valuable mana by feeding total strangers. Atu sternly forces him onto his knees as he tries to explain that he simply felt sorry for them. Atu can't believe his recklessness, reminding him sharply, they don't yet know whether Mynoghra will be peaceful or brutal, or how many battles might lie ahead. So wasting mana like that could be dangerous. Realizing she might have gone too far, scolding her own king, Atu quickly apologizes, but Takuto gently reassures her, reminding her of their partners and that he couldn't survive in this place without her by his side. Takuto also admits feeling awkward around the Dark Elves, suggesting perhaps he is shy. Atu is surprised. She assumed Takuto was deliberately playing the role of a dignified king, communicating solely through her as his servant. The two laugh and tease each other playfully for a moment, until Takuto's summoned scout finally returns. So now what will happen next? Subscribe to our channel to find out what will happen next. Friends, before we wrap up, we've recently launched a membership program where you can enjoy perks like early access to videos and exclusive content just for members, and many more to enhance your interactions. If you're interested, consider joining our membership. To enjoy these benefits, check out the link in the description to join. So friends, if you enjoyed our recap video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.